Cruz and our legal representative, Eric Lee, today to talk about the state of our election campaign, and in particular, the state of the legal filings that the SEP has advanced challenging the undemocratic ballot access requirements in the state of Michigan and California, where the state is arguing that the SEP should have been gathering tens and tens of thousands of signatures in the midst of a expanding pandemic. We're having this discussion, of course, under conditions of a really catastrophic expansion of the pandemic, which we'll be discussing, along with the broader political framework of our election campaign. I'd like to begin first by asking Eric if you could give a report on the state of our filings, and in particular, if you could speak to some of the arguments that are being made by the state in California and in Michigan, that in failing to go out and gather thousands and thousands of signatures in the midst of a pandemic, that the SEP has not been operating with sufficient diligence, I believe it is what they said.
Right. So there are two cases right now which are pending in the courts of appeals. The first of which is a lawsuit which the appeal which we filed from a decision of a district judge in Michigan denying our request to prevent the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, from enforcing a 30,000 person physical signature requirement in the midst of the pandemic. That case is now on appeal at the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, and we've briefed the matter, and it's now up for a decision. And in California, we are also appealing the decision of a district judge in Southern California, which is now before the Ninth Circuit. So in both of those cases, the governors, Governor Newsom in California and Governor Whitmer in Michigan, as you said, argued that we were insufficiently diligent in gathering signatures, despite the fact that the window in which the candidates could have gathered signatures was in the midst of the most deadly and devastating health crisis in the history of the country, in which both states have been global hotspots.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to speak a little bit too on the California case and just conditions in the region. As Eric just mentioned, the time period in which we were expected to collect 200,000 signatures began in April, which was during stay-at-home orders throughout the state as well as throughout many counties. So essentially, both Newsom and Whitmer are telling us that we should have, one, defied their own stay-at-home orders and potentially broken the law, as well as gone out to collect signatures in the midst of the deadly pandemic. That would have both placed ourselves in danger, as well as hundreds of supporters, signature gatherers, and everyone who we would interact with. To acquire some 200,000 signatures, we would have needed to potentially speak to, interact, talk to in person millions of people. So there's really it sort of just shows the degree to which what we're being told is total, has indifference essentially to putting at risk human life and our supporters.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, the International Committee, the Fourth International, we published a statement on February 28th of this year, now more than 5 months ago, in which we warned of the extraordinary danger of the coronavirus pandemic. And that was at a point when the number of deaths worldwide was only at 3,000. But we warned about really the extreme health crisis which was developing. Now there are over 700,000 deaths throughout the world. I think 158,000 in the United States. All the warnings of the Socialist Equality Party about the danger of this pandemic have been confirmed. We took actions as a party, including our election campaign. Marisa, of course, you and I were planning on going throughout the country, holding public meetings and speaking, not just in the United States, but all over the world about our campaign and the perspective of socialism. But we took actions based upon the danger, deciding not to have public meetings and deciding not to petition, because of course one could hardly imagine a more dangerous activity than going around to thousands of people, handing them clipboards, having them take pens and sign in order to get on the ballot. One could hardly imagine a more dangerous activity than that for spreading the coronavirus. But we made those decisions. We would argue that it was precisely because we were being diligent, politically diligent, and also in terms of the health of our members and the public at large, that we decided not to do that. But then the state is arguing, well, because we didn't, we can't be on the ballot for the elections. It's pretty extraordinary.
Well, in both district court decisions, and it's interesting. So in Michigan, it's a Republican judge, and in California, it was a Democratic appointed judge. These are the two judges who both denied who denied our requests for preliminary injunctions in both states. But in both decisions, the judges come up with all sorts of suggestions for ways that the two of you and your campaign supporters should have been gathering signatures. And that includes the judge in California, Judge Dolly G., suggested that since people are going to the grocery stores still, that you should simply approach people as they're in line. And in Michigan, the judge suggested that that if one sanitizes the pens when one hands the clipboard and the papers back and forth, that resolves the problem. Of course, every public health official, except for the president of the United States, obviously, is urging people to maintain social distancing, to stay 6 feet apart. But yes, as Joe says, I mean, what these legal decisions and what the governors in these cases are suggesting in these legal filings is that in order to be reasonable, you would have had to kill people, basically, or to kill your own supporters. And that's not an exaggeration, because that's exactly what speaking to hundreds of thousands of people would have required. I mean, there's no, just one more thing I said, I mean, there is no way to physically hand a paper over, hand a clipboard over, talk about your candidates, talk about your campaign, explain the issues to people who are not to be found anyway outside. And you're somehow supposed to do this and get 200,000 signatures in California, and depending on the level that they're asking in Michigan, between 12 and 30,000 there. I mean, it's a death sentence, really, and there's nothing reasonable about it. And that's what the standard says it has to be.
Eric, one of the issues raised in the response in Michigan is that the state is claiming that we should have behaved like the far-right demonstrators in Lansing. Did you explain that? Right.
So for those readers and listeners of the World Socialist website, you'll recall that in April, at the end of April, I believe, there were a series of far-right demonstrators who came to the state's Capitol building in Lansing and brought their assault rifles, and some of them had swastika flags. They actually brought their assault rifles into the state legislature. Many legislators were rightfully terrified of this. Our international listeners will wonder how that's legal. Well, that's America, it is. But the point is that this was a right-wing demonstration against the stay-at-home order. And Governor Whitmer, in this latest filing, to which we've just submitted our reply, says, I'll just quote, that those protests, quote, effectively demonstrated that First Amendment activities were not precluded by the governor's orders. In other words, because these right-wing militia went to the Capitol, the Socialist Equality Party should have sat there on TV and thought, that's a good idea. If they can do it, we should do it.
Well, they were demanding to the state that they end all restrictions on the pandemic. And the state is essentially saying that we should have done the same thing by violating all the restrictions by going around petitioning. They're essentially agreeing that we should have basically, done everything to violate the basic health basic restrictions to guarantee public health.
And some of those demonstrators were even calling for the killing and assassination of high, profile Democrats, including Whitmer herself. So the fact that this was being used and that these right-wing protesters are being upheld as, the poster children for, upholding democratic rights is just entirely outlandish. And in California, Newsom, in their response to our lawsuit, has actually said that we should have, not only should we have been going out and collecting these signatures, but that what we're arguing for is a way of getting on the ballot that actually does not involve putting anyone's life at risk. So there are many other ways to do that, but nothing has been offered to us. The collection of online signatures or the paying of a filing fee to show that we do have support throughout the state, none of that has been offered. And so, what they said was that if they were to just place us on the ballot, ensuring our constitutional rights by doing so, that would confuse voters. That's the language that they use, which is one, extremely insulting to say that voters would get confused if they saw the SEP on the ballot. But what they really mean by that is that if given the option to vote for a genuine socialist party, that voters would vote for us, and that would entirely upset the Democratic stranglehold over the state. So in so many ways too, there is an improper motive that is behind their arguments. And this is really about preventing any political opposition that would challenge the Democratic Party.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, because there's a lot of issues in what you've just said, Nerissa. The other word that they used in Michigan is that allowing you on the ballot would lead to chaos. And to which we thought, well, if the two-party system is really so aware of its unpopularity that allowing an independent socialist on the ballot would cause chaos, well, that doesn't speak to a profound degree of confidence on the part of the two parties. But just because it's sort of worth stepping back for a second, and we're talking about the legal arguments batted back and forth in filings, and this is very important. But in an international context, the American system for elections is so profoundly, uniquely anti-democratic that it blows out of the water all the claims by governments, both Democratic and Republican administrations, who purport to lecture the rest of the world about upholding free and fair elections. Because what's really at issue here, none of the arguments that the governors in these cases or the judges are making are legitimate. I mean, they don't hold any water. Any reasonable person knows that it's been impossible to gather signatures in the middle of the pandemic, and that if you went up to somebody with a clipboard and tried to yell at them about supporting your candidate, they're more likely to punch you in the face than to sign your petition. But anyway, all of this, there's the secret to this all, which is that these are two Democratic governors there's an election in 3 months. It's supposed to be a narrow election. The Democratic Party lost the state of Michigan by 10,000 votes in 2016 because there was a profound drop-off in enthusiasm for their candidate that year, Hillary Clinton. And now they are using whatever cynical trick in the book, completely contradicting even their own public statements about the seriousness of the virus, basically as a means to the end of ensuring that there are as few, that there's no possibility that voters are going to have any left-wing alternative to Trump and Biden, between the two of whom there really is no fundamental political difference.
Yeah, well, I think that is the basic framework. There are the partisan issues, the conflicts between the Democrats and the Republicans in terms of their electoral calculations, but the basic question is, as you say, both these parties are determined to prevent any political expression of opposition to the policies of the ruling class. If you want to talk about chaotic, everything that the ruling class has done over the past 7 months has produced an absolutely chaotic and catastrophic situation. Their incompetent response to the pandemic, refusing to take any measures to guarantee public safety, then utilizing the pandemic as an opportunity to hand trillions of dollars to Wall Street, which they did at the end of March with the CARES Act, which was passed almost entirely unanimously by Democrats and Republicans and signed into law by Trump on March 27th. And then immediately the campaign to force workers back to work, and everyone knew that this would lead to deaths and a massive surge in cases, and they did it anyway. Of course, spearheaded by Trump, the personification of all that is reactionary, filthy, and criminal in the American ruling class, but implemented by Democrats and Republicans, including the Democratic administrations in Michigan and California, where they continue to implement back to work campaigns. This has led to a spike in deaths. Now you have the campaign to return schools to operation so that children can go back to school, so their parents can go back to work, which is going to lead to a further explosion of cases and deaths. Everything that they are doing has produced a catastrophe. On the other hand, they're moving, or they already have, cutting off federal unemployment benefits for the millions and millions of people who depend upon it to keep their homes and to stop from falling into absolute destitution. That's being cut. You have an absolute catastrophe, which is the result of the policies of the ruling class. And their response is there will be no opposition to them when it comes to the electoral process.
Yeah, I think that the responses to our lawsuits in both states really reflect the callous response that the ruling class has had towards the pandemic, which in our analysis, the ruling class from day one has seen the pandemic as really an economic question, while for millions of workers, this has been a complete health catastrophe. And as Joe was just saying, the fact that some 30 million people are being kicked off of their supplemental unemployment benefits. Millions of people don't know if they're going to be able to pay rent this next month, where their next meals are coming from. This is the choice, that's the so-called choice that's offered in the election in November. It's between both parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, that agree on the cuts to unemployment, on the injection of trillions of dollars into Wall Street and the corporations, while for the working class is being pushed back into the schools, pushed back into work. And that's the response that we've gotten in our lawsuit. So it would be a mistake to sort of see it as something separate. What's really at stake here in the SEP attaining ballot access is providing a voice, a platform the party that represents the working class. Our party is fighting to uphold the safety and health of all workers and young people everywhere above profit. And we are at the forefront of leading the opposition to the return to work campaign, to being pushed into the schools. And what's really at stake is that what we speak for, the politics that we represent, risks being left off completely the ballot. And what that amounts to is not just the the violation of the constitutional rights of Joe and myself to engage in the political process, but what it amounts to is the violation of democratic rights for millions of people who would want to cast that vote for a socialist party.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, because the two parties had a choice to make. They could have said, we welcome, we are confident in our policies, and we welcome voices from outside the two-party system. There's an important phrase that's used that Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes developed, called the marketplace of ideas. He made an argument that in the ideological fight between socialism and capitalism, it would be wrong for the US government to merely outlaw socialist ideas and socialist propagandizing, agitation, on the grounds that capitalism has confidence that it will prevail in the marketplace of ideas. Well, now you're not allowed in the marketplace. And that comes from, seems to me, and I think you see this in the weakness of the arguments that are being made, the nonsensicalness of the arguments. You're not allowed. I mean, one quick example, which is important to share. In the Ninth Circuit, in the California appeal, we submitted our documents immediately after the district court ruled against us. And the panel from the Ninth Circuit, which was comprised of a majority of Democrats, denied our request for them to hear this case before the election in a rapid manner. So in other words, and this is sort of course, what a democratic society. Of course you have the right to file a lawsuit. Of course you have the right to access to the courts. But if you want to challenge the fact that you've been denied access to the ballot, we're only going to hear that case after the election is over. So it's basically, they know what they're doing, and hopefully we are asking them to reconsider that decision. And I think serious judges will recognize that has to be done. Last, I would just say, a lot of people are recognizing as we go through this rigmarole, this Kafkaesque situation in both of these cases, that real change is obviously not going to come through these processes. I think that's why you see so many demonstrations, teachers protesting the return to work, the return to school, the protests and strikes which have broken out not just in the US and internationally. That's the other process which is developing.
Yeah, we will certainly pursue this case in our appeals in the courts. We have, I would say, in a certain sense, irrefutable legal arguments. If one were to judge them truly on their merits, the arguments of the state are absurd and reactionary. But this is the capitalist system. I mean, the marketplace of ideas has become a monopoly, and it's a monopoly which is dictated by the interests of the corporate and financial elite. That's American politics. And the real orientation of our campaign will, whatever the outcome of this struggle, will be the development of a movement in the working class. I would just, perhaps in concluding this discussion, I want to encourage everyone who's listening in to go to the World Socialist website now and read the resolution that was just passed by the Socialist Equality Party Congress. It's on the front page of the WSWS, right underneath the perspective, the global pandemic, the class struggle, and the tasks of the Socialist Equality Party. WSWS.org and read that, go to WSWS.org and read that statement as soon as you can, because I think it really provides the clearest analysis of what is happening. It provides an analysis and a theory of the course of the pandemic, the response of the ruling class to it, how this is all, how the present catastrophe has been created as a result of the policies of the ruling elite, both Republican and Democrat here in the United States. And it outlines a perspective for the working class to fight back. And one of the points that it stresses is that while the first half of the year was dominated by the response of the ruling class to the pandemic, the second half will be dominated by the response of the working class, by auto workers, by teachers, by Amazon workers and meatpacking workers and transit workers, all of whom are, and the working class as a whole that is affected by the back to school campaign. All of this, every section of the working class is being impacted by the catastrophic policies of the ruling elite, and they're going to fight back. I mean, that is what is already transpiring. But you have a situation, there's an article on the website today about the conditions in the auto plants, and a Ford worker talking about the fact that one of his coworkers was vomiting on the line, sick, and they refused to stop production to sanitize it and to not alone shut down the plant. But these are the conditions that have been created by the ruling elite. This is why they're terrified of the growth of opposition in the working class, the growth of a socialist movement in the working class, and why they are doing everything they can to prevent that from finding any expression within the political system. But the working class will have its say, and we're entering a period of mass social upheavals. Nerissa, did you have any final points?
Well, I mean, I think you wrapped it up, Joe, and just to encourage everyone to follow our campaign. We're going to continue to appeal and to fight to get on the ballot. And this really represents, the representation of the working class and coming into the historical epoch. And we're seeing this, as Joe was saying, throughout industries across the country and beyond, that the next 6 months really will more and more reflect the working class pursuing its own political interest, and our party represents that.
I would urge everyone to sign up for the election campaign at socialism2020.org. And go to the WSWS and read that resolution and make the decision to support our campaign and join the Socialist Equality Party. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Nerissa and Eric.
Thank you.